Hello again. Thanks for joining us. Morning Live continues. We turn our attention to something that's a bit of a hot potato at the moment, the issue of land. We saw it play a major role in the build-up to the elections this year. So we unpack this issue. There have been some developments now since the President, Jacob Zuma's signing of the Restitution of Land Rights Amendment Bill into law. The lodging of claims has been opened again recently. After having been closed from the end of 1998 or so, the process has resumed until the 30th of June 2019. Significant claims by Inkosi Simpiwe Zuma, King Goodwill Zwelithini and other traditional leaders have made news in the media. We're going to unpack this with Dr. Aninka Claassens, I should say, senior researcher from Law, Race and Gender at the University of Cape Town. She's joining us to shed more light on the issue of land reform. A very good morning to you, Doctor. Thanks again for your time.
Good morning. Thank you.
In 1913, the Land Act institutionalized rules which kept black people from owning and retaining land. That's just a bit of context, creating inequalities which perpetuated the poverty. My question to you is, in your view, is the land restitution an adequate measure to somehow right the wrongs of the past?
Well, land restitution is only one component of land reform. It's for people who could prove that they'd owned land and that they were dispossessed of that land. There's also redistribution for people who haven't got that kind of clear history, and there's tenure reform for people living on land which they couldn't own or they didn't have legal rights to just because they were black. So restitution is really meant to just solve the problem of the fact that after the 1913 Land Act, you had this process of forcibly removing people into the Bantustans, and it's meant to undo the consequences of those forced removals. So the idea originally was to unpack the legacy of the Bantustans by giving people back the land that they had been removed from.
One question that comes to the fore when one speaks of land redistribution or restitution is the issue of how far back do we go? Because some may argue that if we go far back enough, that perhaps the Khoisan would then have to lay claim to some of the major land. What's your take on that issue?
Well, the Khoisan are laying claim, and they are saying that the 1913 cut-off date prejudices them. But there's a very strange thing going on, which is that the 1913 cut-off date hasn't been changed. The Restitution Amendment Act kept the 1913 cut-off date, and yet President Zuma has gone to the National House of Traditional Leaders and solicited them to put in these large tribal land claims, and the announcements are that the claims go back to 1838, and those claims just simply can't succeed under the current legislation. So there's a very strange misfit between all these big tribal claims being lodged and the terms of the legislation. And it's not surprising, really, that people are making the claims, because there are all these political statements that seem to imply that the 1913 cut-off date is flexible, and yet it was retained.
Let's speak about gender issues now when it comes to land ownership and land acquisition. You have done some work, having led the CLS's Rural Women's Action Research Project in the attempt of somehow helping to ease the ladies' burdens when it comes to that. What have your observations and experiences been like in your initiative?
Well, on the one hand, we've seen, really severe oppression of women, particularly by traditional leaders who continue to insist that women don't have land rights in some areas. But we've also seen really extraordinary processes of change, where we've seen single women in particular, because our marriage rates in South Africa amongst the African population are absolutely plummeting. So you have a lot of single women with children, and we've seen those women claiming and getting residential sites in communal areas, and doing that through a kind of grassroots process that's been taking place across the country, not initiated by any law, but actually succeeding, because women are saying, we've got rights as members of these communities, we've got rights of birthrights, we've got rights derived from custom and our obligations to look after our children, and we should be treated equally with men. So you see women combining customary entitlements with equality and making these claims, and a recent survey of 3,000 women found that this process is not just an anecdotal process, but a real process of change negotiated from within by rural women.
And let's discuss more claims now. That of King Goodwill Zwelithini has been said to be the largest at the moment. What merits do you think he has when it comes to this particular claim?
Well, none. It can't succeed, and whoever has advised him that it will succeed is being disingenuous, because government could have amended the 1913 date in the Restitution Act and chose not to. And his claim goes back to 1838, and what the Act says is that you have to prove you were dispossessed after 1913, and that you were dispossessed as a result of racial law or practices. So that claim simply can't succeed. You know, one of the problems with that claim really is the impact it would have on women. And what we've seen are women since '94 making these claims, negotiating improvements, and in a sense, if all that land went back under traditional leaders, and particularly the Ingonyama Trust, it would reverse those gains significantly, because it would change the kind of power relations within which women are making these claims.
Doctor, thank you so much for your time. So much to say, so little time. We wanted to discuss the claim of Inkosi Simpiwe Zuma as well. We'll have to save that one for another time. Thanks again for joining us. Dr. Aninka Claassens is a senior researcher at Law, Race and Gender Unit at UCT. Stay with us, more coming up after the break.